conflict brings a narrow opening for peace but also fresh threats. Iran and Oman are close to agreeing to a new shipping route through Hormuz, yet Tehran denies any recent talks with Washington. With shipping collapsing, economic pain spreading, can diplomacy prevent another major attack is what we will discuss along with other important aspects of this very conflict tonight. We've been joined by two guests. Let me introduce them to you one by one. Our first guest is Dr. Jason H. Gamble. He's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute and he joins us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell, to have joined us. We've also been joined by Dr. Mustafa Khanna. He is an assistant professor at the Sarkaya University Middle East Institute. Joins us from Sarkaya as well. Thank you very much, Mustafa, to have joined us as well. We'll begin with you, Dr. Jason. President Trump says that negotiations are moving along very nicely, quote unquote, while Iran's deputy foreign minister says no talks with Washington have taken place. Who is telling the fuller story in your point of view, and are indirect messaging still being presented as formal negotiations? Also, Trump has repeatedly threatened a massive attack only to step back and suggest that the deal is close. Is this deliberate pressure on Tehran, or does it show that Washington is uncertain about its next move? Your take.
Yeah, I think right now, unfortunately for the United States, President Trump's credibility is in decline. He's stated on a number of occasions throughout this war that Iran is either begging for negotiations, or we're far down the line on negotiations to a good deal. Again, whatever that means, only to find very shortly afterwards that the Iranian side completely downplays or even disavows that the talks are even happening. So I think right now it's difficult to say for sure, obviously, because we don't have great visibility on what's going on behind the scenes. It wouldn't surprise me to learn that the exchange of messages through mediators is viewed by the White House as, again, a sign that progress is being made on the diplomatic front. It seems right now that the talks between Iran and Oman, which by all accounts seem to be excluding the United States, seem to be making much more progress. There's been, again, talks that even Iran is saying that some sort of a deal there is imminent. I think from the Iranian standpoint, it again solidifies both their influence in the region and ultimately their influence over the Strait of Hormuz. If they're able to reach some accommodation with Oman, which I can only assume is also negotiating, if not explicitly, then tacitly on behalf of the other interested GCC states on some workable way forward, at least in the short term, while excluding Washington. And I think what Iran is trying to do is outmaneuver Washington here and effectively demonstrate that they were able to reach an accommodation with the local stakeholders in the region, and that if provided the U.S. remove its naval blockade from Iran. So I think they're increasingly confining some of Trump's diplomatic options here. And I think right now we've seen small signals that the Trump administration is even begrudgingly, I think, willing to abide by these new terms. We saw yesterday that they quietly dropped a handful of Iranian interests off of a sanctions list. My assumption there is that it's tied to the negotiations between Iran and Oman. So I think right now, President Trump would like to see the war end and be able to pull back the U.S. forces in a way that will help reduce some of the very costly measures that have been taken thus far with little strategic benefit. And we're seeing now that Iran is able to solidify some of its gains.
All right, let's see which side gains, which side doesn't. But I hope both sides at the end of the day are victors, so that this deal could move forward and peace could prevail. Dr. Mustafa Khanna, Iran and Oman have agreed on the coordinates of a possible middle corridor, but Tehran says this will not immediately reopen Hormuz unless and until the U.S. changes its behavior. Is this genuine progress in your point of view, or only the beginning of a much harder negotiation? Also, I'd like to add that Iran says that the arrangement is strictly between Tehran and Muscat, while Trump, Marco Rubio, Scott Bessent all describe an imminent broader deal. Can Oman bridge these sharply different positions without appearing to serve either side? Will Pakistan do the needful?
Thank you, Omar, for this question. I think this is a cautiously positive development. Of course, it won't resolve the standoff on its own, but it buys diplomacy some room, real breathing room. So, but crucially, Iran retains every option to close Hormuz again. It can invoke Israeli aggression in Lebanon or US strikes on its allies as a pretext. So Tehran gained leverage here. It hasn't surrendered any. But now the harder task is translating this narrow deal with Muscat into a comprehensive one with Washington. And here, Iran's posture is deliberate. It won't be seen sitting across from the power that killed its supreme leader. So, using an intermediary lets Tehran negotiate without appearing to negotiate. I think that's partly about managing internal balances, and which is exactly why Oman or intermediaries like Oman is indispensable. Oman's role isn't just exchanging messages between sides, it's facilitating the process. I think two things give Oman this authority. One, it controls one coastline of the Strait of Hormuz, and the second, it has the capacity to bring other regional intermediaries into calculus. So I would expect others to join Muscat uh, to widen this narrow deal into a comprehensive one and also lay the ground for peace.
All right. Let's hope that the ground for peace becomes more solid this time and that we are able to move forward in a positive direction. Dr. Jason H. Campbell, Tehran wants greater control over ships entering the Gulf and may seek tolls as this deal with Oman nears. While major shipping groups are saying, 12 major groups are saying that compulsory charges would violate established practice. Could Washington ever accept such an arrangement in order to reopen Hormuz?
Well, I think it's becoming increasingly clear that Washington is going to have to agree to some arrangement whereby Iran is able to economically benefit by or through its established control over the Strait of Hormuz. I think at the outset of the war, that's certainly something that Washington would not have abided by. And we've seen on a number of occasions President Trump and other senior officials talk about the importance of the free flow of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. But the reality right now has changed drastically. And we saw, even in the MOU that was signed back in June, we saw reference to the establishment of a development fund for Iran that would help them rebuild their country, which is, again, trying to find a creative way to ensure that Iran is able to achieve the economic benefits it's seeking without explicitly referring to it as a toll. And we're even seeing that now here in terms of the negotiations between Iran and Oman, whereby most accounts we're hearing the phrase service fee being used as, again, that additional charge made to goods that go through or to promote the free shipping through the strait. The big question now will be what amount is that service fee and for how long will it endure? And the phrase service fee or service fees are charged in other instances around the world through straits and other narrow waterways. So it wouldn't be unprecedented, but we'll see what it amounts to. I think the other thing to keep in mind in the longer term here is whether Iran will allow for the economic, I guess, free market to determine alternative routes through the Strait of Hormuz. If you recall, a few weeks ago, Iran struck Shalala port in Oman largely as a signal to show that, look, we're not going to abide by countries using other ports or alternatives outside of the strait. So there's sort of the near term, what are the economic requirements needed to open the strait? And number two, in the medium to longer term, will Iran abide by countries finding alternative routes to avoid the Strait of Hormuz?
Many questions, and we all need answers, and quicker, sooner than later, rather. Mustafa, coming to you, only 2 vessels have crossed the Strait of Hormuz on Wednesday, compared with around 130 to 140 a day before the war. Explosions are reported near an oil tanker. What guarantees would shipping companies need before they trust any new corridor? Also, the Houthis have claimed that they have attacked more Saudi tankers, while traffic through the Bab al-Mandab has also collapsed. Does the pressure on both the waterways suggest a coordinated regional strategy, or are the Houthis pursuing their own dispute with Saudi Arabia?
Thank you for this question, Omar. I think there are two separate questions here and both important. Uh, on the first, if I were an insurance company, I would wait for a comprehensive deal before trusting any corridor. And here's why: because this is an interim arrangement, 60 days, so it could easily collapse before then. And regional dynamics are really moving fast. Israel has signaled that it doesn't care about any deal, whether it be between Oman and Iran or between Washington and Tehran. So it will strike regardless. I think the threat coming from Tel Aviv is real, and it's why this deal remains far from resolving the whole crisis. And on the Houthis, I think they do have their own agency, but their latest actions, I think, they are coordinated with Tehran. And Iran's stand for Hezbollah in Lebanon didn't only inject confidence or restore confidence in Hezbollah, but also it restored confidence across Iran's whole regional network. So I think that's why we are seeing a deliberate double pressure strategy right now. One squeeze through the Strait of Hormuz and another through Bab el-Mandeb, and both aimed at disrupting the global energy markets and global maritime trade.
All right, so of course, pressure tactic nevertheless. Dr. Jason, Iran may believe that it can outlast Washington by keeping oil prices high, disrupting trade, increasing pressure on American allies. Is economic pain now Tehran's strongest weapon, particularly as Trump faces growing frustration at home? Also, Iran has reportedly warned the Gulf states that their oil fields, power plants and water systems could be targeted if the US attacks Iranian infrastructure. Could this pressure force Washington's Gulf partners to push Trump more firmly towards a diplomatic solution?
Yeah, I think collectively you touched on the main components of Iran's leverage right now. One is that, yes, it does feel that it can outlast the United States in terms of the economic pain levied, not just on the United States and potentially its stock market, but also the international price of oil and other goods like fertilizer and other key things that tend to come from that part and require travel through the Strait of Hormuz. And the other part of that is both their capability and demonstrated willingness to strike out at key infrastructure and interests, not just for the U.S. and Israel, but its partners throughout the region, which has already taken a significant toll. So I think when you look at that collectively, Tehran thinks with some high degree of validation that it can outlast the United States, particularly given some of the political sensitivities involved, not least of which are upcoming elections here in the United States and also in Israel. So I think right now they are trying to use that leverage and the fact that they are less time constrained to, I think, come to some advantageous terms on at least a near-term agreement. I'm not convinced yet that the powers that be in Tehran are necessarily thinking in the long-term interests of the country and could very well come to regret missing an opportunity there. But I think for the short term, they remain very much influential and have things in their favor. And as time goes on, I think that only increases. For the United States, of course, we've seen that, yes, the U.S. has expended a substantial amount of both offensive and defensive resources in this war. Its key partners and allies throughout the region have done so as well. So that has already limited their military options. And I think their military options have further been limited by the fact that Iran has demonstrated that it can, with increasingly good precision, hit U.S. bases and interests throughout the region, which makes the options such as staging ground forces somewhere in the region a pretty precarious proposal at this stage.
Precarious proposal, but a proposal that needs to work is what we need at this moment in order for peace to prevail. Mustafa Kanar, President Pezeshkian says Iran will defend itself but does not want to expand the war. Other Iranian officials threatened ships using unauthorized routes and warned Gulf infrastructure could be struck, as I've asked Dr. Jason. Is Iran's leadership divided over diplomacy and escalation? What's your take?
I think it appears to be true. Iran's political structure is really unique. There are many competing power centers, and while the supreme leader is the strongest actor, he oftentimes acts as the balancer between those power centers. So one faction genuinely presses to extend the war, both in duration and scope. But the pro-negotiation figures like President Pezeshkian or um, Galibaf, Mohammed Bakr Galibaf, they want a deal with Washington without prolonging the war because they see the real risk here. And I agree with Dr. Jason here. There is a real risk for Iran to miss an opportunity. And this risk is Iran may look like, it holds the Strait of Hormuz leverage right now, but it's only for right now. In the medium to longer term, American military capacity can outlast Iran's if this war turns into a war of attrition. So Iran, yes, Iran has the demographic advantage, Iran has the geographic advantage, but the United States has the strongest military in the world. So yes, there are real divisions, and that's precisely why the Oman deal took so long. And that's why we are still waiting for the final approval by the supreme leader, and which tells us something.
Time the show starts, we might have a final deal and we could talk about that deal, but it hasn't happened as of yet. Might happen within a couple of minutes or a couple of hours, but let's see. Dr. Jason, this is my last question to you. I'd like a short answer. Reports claim the US has used nearly 80% of its THAAD interceptors and around half of its Patriot missiles. This was CNN that reported it. Trump strongly denies any shortage. Who is on the right side? Is it the press that has been reporting it? Is it Trump that is denying all of it? What's your take? Short answer, please.
Well, I think the shortages are absolutely real. We're seeing uniformed senior military officials here in the United States, increasingly either through leaks or other reports, demonstrate their concern about not just the region but overall readiness of the U.S. Defense apparatus in a more global sense because of this. And I would point out, though, to build off what Professor Mustafa was referring to in terms of the long term, what we're seeing now throughout the Gulf and elsewhere in the region are these countries that are quickly engaging other countries, the United States, Ukrainian countries, in bolstering their ability to deter and confront some of the Iranian asymmetric opportunities that they've demonstrated here. So I think in this short to medium term, we're going to see some of these countries start to rebuild in a way that I think Iran's long-term leverage is going to dwindle, at least from a military threat perspective. So that's something to watch very closely going forward, is that it's less about replenishing high-end interceptors, which are important, but it's also building out a more comprehensive air defense that will, I think, in time, limit Iran's ability to threaten the region.
Let's see what happens in the coming days and weeks. Dr. Jason Campbell, thank you very much to have joined us. And as we always tell to our first-time guests, till next time. Mustafa, Pakistan is continuing diplomatic contact, and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is visiting the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as Riyadh builds a maritime coalition supported by Pakistan and Turkey. Could regional countries produce a workable settlement wherein direct US-Iran diplomacy has failed?
Yes, I believe so. At the very least, they can restrain the existing tensions and prevent further escalation. And that is far better than nothing. Regional mediators, Oman, Pakistan, Turkey, genuinely have the capacity to lay the ground for negotiations. And they're facilitating talks between Iran and the United States. And whether those talks are direct or indirect doesn't matter. What matters is these diplomatic channels stay active. And that's thanks to these regional actors. And there is also a second benefit, which I'd like to mention here. They help contain the conflict, keeping it from drawing in outside powers like Russia, China, or European powers, because every additional actor would only complicate the picture and narrow the mediators' room to maneuver. So I think these regional actors are performing a genuinely valuable role, and I would argue an indispensable one.
All right, of course, and an indispensable one. Pakistan has shown its importance as well. We've seen how these whole efforts bore fruit in the form of the first round of talks and continue to bear fruit. Let's hope that we get to see talks in the very, very near future as well. Thank you very much, Mustafa, to have joined us as well. Pleasure to have talked to you.